Welcome, everybody. You might notice Marino's not here. He might make an appearance later, but we have very special guests today for our live stream. John Capobianco, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank
you so much for having me. This is really exciting. We got to meet at Cloud Field Day, and you invited me on, and we have some really topical stuff and some cool stuff we're going to talk about. I'm really excited, and hopefully Marino can join us a little bit later. It'd be nice to have another Canadian here in case you decide to tariff me for this podcast, right?
The tariff jokes have started already. I'm so sorry on behalf of everyone. I'm so sorry. I had nothing to do with it. I was barely involved. Before we get into like some cool AI stuff, do you want to just tell the folks who might be watching now or later a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's John Capobianco, and I actually got into technology a little bit later in my life. I found myself, on academic probation from university and a student loan to pay off. So I took a job at an aluminum factory where I worked for 5 years and I mean 12-hour shifts, steel-toe boots, danger, heavy machinery, X number of days since our last fatality kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So not a great life. And 2 years into that, I decided I needed the job, but I wanted to go back to school. So I went and took a 3-year computer programmer analyst course. But through my journey, I found myself more in IT than in software development. So I got my A+ and my N+, a bunch of Microsoft certifications. I was reorged from Microsoft after I got my MCSE. Like the week I got my MCSE, I was moved to networks because I had my Network Plus, which is funny enough. So then I built a career on Cisco technologies. I was a senior network engineer for an insurance company in Canada for about 7 years. And then I was a senior network architect at the Parliament of Canada. And then I moved to Cisco for about 2.5 years where I started my IT journey or AI journey. Mm-hmm. And now I find myself at a startup called Selector AI.
Okay, very cool. Man, I laughed when you said they moved you from MCSE to networking because you're Network Plus, because as someone who has gotten their own MCSE, I know the amount of work that goes into taking those 7 exams. And Network Plus is 1 exam.
It was my first culture shock that maybe middle to senior management wasn't highly connected with the world of technology below it.
Yes.
Because I said, no, listen, like you said, and it was actually the MCITP server admin. It wasn't MCSE, it was the next iteration for Server 2008. Which was, like you said, 7 or 10 exams. You needed a client exam. You needed a bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. But he holds up my resume and goes, no, but it says Network Plus here, and we really need someone on the network because Jim, the only guy running the network there, was overwhelmed. Right. And I said, I'm happy to do it, provided you send me on the CCNA boot camp. And they were like, what's that? I said, I explained to them, we have Cisco equipment and there's a boot camp. I can go get a network certification from Cisco, which will augment my Network Plus, right? So I did that, and that led to me just focusing 100% on networks.
Wow.
Now, in the pre-stage, we sort of, how does this lead to AI? Like, none of this sounds AI related, right?
Yeah.
I started doing network automation in 2014 with Ansible. I self-published a book in 2019 called Automate Your Network, which is free on my GitHub now. It's open source, the PDF, just go get it if you're starting in your network automation journey. But network automation then led to Python and being connected to more writing code as opposed to doing just pure CLI work. And I feel like AI, at least in my field of network engineering, is the next evolution or augmentation of network automation. That's not to say you have to have a fully automated network to embrace AI, but that was my path towards AI was, well, hang on, I'm running this network automation code that, let's say, can get a routing table. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I was making it into a mind map. Really cool network automation script. AI comes along, and then when ChatGPT introduced an API, it just clicked. I said, well, why can't I send that routing table as an API call to the artificial intelligence and ask it what it can tell me? What's my default route? Where does traffic go to this IP? Whatever you can think of, right? And it clicked right away. And this was just after ChatGPT 3. So I started with GPT 3.5 with the GUI.
Right. Okay.
One of those first million users in the first 5 days, their big famous number or whatever it was. I was one of those users. And then they trickled out an API a few weeks later, and it all just fell into place. It's just a REST API like any other API. And I can send it stuff like networking things and interrogate it and talk to it and get insight and summarization and analysis and whatever, right?
Okay. So what sort of tasks were you trying to get the AI to help you with?
Right. So I as a second book, I'm so after Ansible, after about 4 years of Ansible, some people started to ask me if I was looking at Cisco PyETS, a Pythonic automation framework, a little different than Ansible.
Okay.
And so I embraced that and actually became, very, very good at it to the point where I wrote a book with Danny Wade about it from Cisco Press. And chapter 23 of the book shows how the two frameworks can work together. So with AI, I've started to use LangChain or LangGraph or LangStar, if we want to call it that, different tools from this LangChain suite. And they overlap nicely with PyETS. PyETS could, I could run a show command and PyETS turns it into JSON, JavaScript object notation.
Right.
My very next call is to bounce that JSON back to the AI and ask it questions like, do you see any errors with this interface? So I could do show interfaces and get 48 interfaces of data. And in one context window, send all that and say, are there any errors? What interfaces are having problems? Whatever questions you would want to ask of an interface without having to write test case by test case by test case, doing it manually. Here's the JSON, here's the key value pair that I want to interrogate if it's true or false or greater than 0. If CRC errors are greater than 10 or whatever, 0, the AI will pick up that value and say, yeah, interface 4 has 30 CRC errors. You might want to look at it without me doing anything other than getting the data and sending it to the AI. So those are some of my baby steps with AI. And let's call that AI 1.0. Okay, so sending data to a REST API.
Mm-hmm.
I would call AI 1.5 retrieval augmented generation. So here's how this changed a little bit. I would use PyETS to get the data from the network and then turn it into embeddings, which are the floating point numbers, the vectors, and store them in a vector store, a ChromaDB, for example, or Pinecone.io. There's various vector stores. Elasticsearch works very well. Something that's a database that's made for vectors, not like SQL or certain other databases. One that's made to store these floating point numbers. Okay, and then the AI does a similarity search against this database. So when I ask what's the default route, it's not me sending it a huge payload of a routing table and hoping it can get parsed correctly. It's doing a similarity search based on the vectors in the database. So that works great. 1.5 RAG, retrieval augmented solutions come along. And then we start to use retrieval augmented fine tuning, using retrieval augmentation to get data that then we fine tune models with. I would argue we're at 2.0, maybe even 2.5 now, this age of agents. Okay. And you're hearing all about agents, right? So agents are a little bit different in that instead of me writing the code for Python to go get the data and do all this stuff, the agent just takes care of that. I say, what's my default route to an agent? And the agent calls tools and does different things to just do that work for you, right? And I would suggest we've kind of landed there with a new protocol, Model Context Protocol, MCP, just like routing protocols in the early 90s, right? 1988, RIP1 gets ratified. OSPF comes out a few months later. Mm-hmm. Or like DHCP for IP addresses. Like we have a protocol now, MCP, for agent-to-agent communication. So they're making it even easier now where if you wrote an agent that did great math calculations, let's say, you can plug your agent into other systems agents and they all work collaboratively.
That was That was a huge info dump. With that, we covered a lot of ground there. I want to back up a little bit because
Yeah.
you mentioned vector databases. I've heard of them a few times. Do you know what makes them unique versus, say, like a key value store, like a NoSQL thing, or say a Microsoft SQL Server that's a traditional structured relational database?
So they're unique in that they can handle multi-dimensional data points. So when we send it in a floating point number 16, a float 16 number, it
Hmm.
can actually take the dimensions of that as opposed to a flat structured traditional database. That's my understanding, is that it's just that it can store floating point multi-dimensional numbers as vectors. So if you want to do any homework, I think the industry has sort of landed on ChromaDB as a de facto, because it runs in memory and it's local and it's private and it's easy to use. Um,
Okay.
but if you're an Elastic shop, or if you want to store this in the cloud and have kind of a point and click experience, you can use pinecone.io. There's actually a burgeoning market in the vector store, as you can imagine, because people want to do this RAG approach. Now, if you're Google or if you're Amazon or Azure, I'm sure they have built-in, widgets that are your vector database, right?
Yeah. But sometimes those vector databases are actually very expensive. And I just want to acknowledge, hi, Alex. Thanks for joining.
Hey,
And
Alex.
Alex is talking about using AI to handle data on the front end. And he eventually wants to use a vector database to allow his AI agent to have a source of memory to acquire certain things.
I think that's a sound approach.
Yes.
We're going to get into a little bit about maybe line graph, I hope, today.
Okay.
But in a line graph, there's certain nodes you can add, and you might want to look into the memory node. So if I could draw a picture in your mind, my line graph is actually quite simple, and this kind of leads us nicely in MCP. There's a start and an end. There's a starting point and an end point for the graph. And between the start and an end is an assistant. Now, your assistant is not a lot of code. It's your assistant. And the assistant is connected to the end and the start, and a tools node. All right. Now, with the tools node, it can iterate through that tool node. So this is where we lead to MCP, and we'll talk about this. It's a good segue. So an assistant, let's say, how is the weather in Dallas today? The assistant has no idea. The AI LLM has no idea. But in your tools, the node it's connected to, if you connect it to a weather MCP that offers a weather lookup tool, now your assistant is going to say, they've asked me about the weather. Oh, in my toolkit, I have a get weather tool. I'm going to pass the city along as a parameter to this tool, and it'll come back with the weather in natural language.
Okay. All right. That put a lot of things together for me that I was uncertain about when it comes to MCP. That's really cool. Well, mate, do you want to get into, you sent me a link to a repository where we could play around with some stuff. Do you want to start playing around with some stuff?
Yeah, I would love to try it live, and we have some people watching. So we didn't stage any of this. I literally jumped on with Ned and said, here's a link. I think we could try it to explore MCP. Now, if the thing doesn't work, we can at least look at the code and I can walk through how this all comes together. But in terms of MCP, if people are wondering, Model Context Protocol, if you haven't heard about it, it's okay. If you've heard too much about it, it's also okay. This was a protocol released by Anthropic in very late November of 2024. So it's only 4 months old, okay? We're talking about a 4-month-old protocol. This would be like, 4 months after getting your first router with RIP and trying to get two computers to talk to each other. So what you're going to see is a bunch of folders here. If you want to expand, let's say the GitHub folder.
Okay.
So now these folders, if you want, can you open up a new browser tab, Ned, and go to Model Context Protocol, all one word, .io.
Yeah.
And I'll just to show you where I got these from, because I did not write these. This is the whole idea behind it. So GitHub says, here's an MCP server. So this is a page I recommend people look at and see how it says think of MCP as a USB-C port for AI applications, a standardized way to connect your devices to various peripherals and accessories. This does that except for models and data sources and tools. So if you scroll down on the left a little bit, there's an example server example somewhere. Did they change this page? I'll go to the welcome page. I'm sorry, Ned. Not the user guide.
I'm under user.
Oh, no.
I think I actually visited this a couple days ago, and I was on the user guides.
Where did that go? It's model. No, sorry. So this is the Anthropic page. Did model context protocol.io take you here?
Model context protocol.io.
Sorry.
.io.
Yeah, try.io.
Example servers.
Right there. Example
there
servers.
We go.
Okay. So this is like a starter, hello world, getting started. You literally go MCP model shopping. So do you want something that you can interface with a Postgres database easily, or Google Drive, or a file system? So I have file system incorporated, and it lets you literally say, can you please write this data to a file in this folder? It'll make the folder and save the file. But if you look at the GitHub, so click on GitHub. Now what happens is they're going to say, here are the tools that this MCP server has. And then at the very bottom, how to integrate it with, say, Claude Desktop or other new IDEs for vibe coding.
Okay, so I see all of these different tools. Right. These are operations, basically. Create or update file. And it has some well-defined inputs that it's expecting and what it returns back.
Right.
And if I scroll down...
Now, we might want to pause here. So, a couple of things. This is just like OSPF advertising routes or DHCP handing you an IP address. And DHCP is a good example. So DHCP has DORA, discover, offer, request, acknowledge, right? My MCP client, because this is client server based and we're looking at the server, my client says, hey, MCP server, what tools do you have? And the MCP server says, here's the tools I have. And then I say, how do I use your tools? And it says, oh, here's the inputs that tool needs. And then my AI, now knowing this, knows what to pass as inputs, totally dynamically, totally autonomously, no hard coding of anything. So I say, I say literally, can you please create a GitHub file in Automate Your Network, repo, packet conversations. It invokes the create file tool and it reads my environment variable for my GitHub token and creates the file. Now, imagine having to do that in a Python script or manually or the old way. You need to look up the API specification, the Swagger, get your request library, handle your token, handle your body, do the post. There's a lot of friction there. This is the whole point of the new idea, is that we just connect to the MCP server of choice, right?
Right.
Sorry, I missed that. There was a comment there about price tracking. Is there a price tracking MCP?
I think he was just saying like that's a potential.
So if you keep scrolling here, Ned, you can kind of get an idea. So Brave Search is one that I've integrated in M.A.I.N. Okay. And now you need an API key for this, but it lets me do web lookups from my queries. And it searches the web. Google Maps, memory. Sequential thinking is a neat one if you click on that. So if you tap into this sequential thinking and add this as a tool to your code, your solution. So Ned, let's take a step back. I'm trying to write some new application in 2025. And I want to use AI, but I want it to do like complex problems or like, so just read this as we're talking about this. Revise its thoughts, branch into alternative reasoning paths, generate and verify hypotheses. You plug into this MCP server, and again, it will tell you, hey, there's a sequential thinking tool, and hey, here's the inputs it needs. And your AI will then invoke this. So how I tested this, I said, could you help me solve the two-door problem? And it said, I need 6 steps to ration and reason that out. And it tries to help me solve the two-door problem. Now, if we want to go back to the code, so all you do is, if you go up to the top here, can you go to servers and the root there on the GitHub?
Yep.
So you literally go code clone, and now you have all the folders, and you start just bringing the folders into your project. So if you look at my project,
All right, let's jump back
I,
here.
those
Okay.
folders are from the servers like the servers/GitHub, right?
Okay.
So it will come with a Docker file, and you don't. These are like you don't touch them. You don't do anything. You just need to build and run this Docker and write your client in such a way that it will read the tools and discover the tools and start using the tools.
Okay.
Okay. Follow me so far? Any questions? Anything you want to dive into? Or
God, man, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around the way that you would even write one of these MCP servers to expose these endpoints. So
let's look at one. So if you collapse the GitHub and go to selector, not selector plus, but selector.
Okay.
I have a client in Python and a server in Python. If you look at the server, this is going to abstract the, so the URL and the API key is abstracted through a .env file, right? And if you just keep going down, I have a class that points to our API.
Okay.
I have an ask function. Now, all of this is async, by the way, and all of this is using RPC JSON 2. None of this is HTTP. You don't expose any ports. It's all standard input output. So if you keep going down here, if you want to collapse, go into the little column and just collapse the functions as we go. So there's an ask function, send response, monitor the thing. How many lines of code is this? Right, so this is for
136.
Right, so this is wrapping an API call into an MCP server that you can plug into and discover the tool. Ask selector is the tool, and that's it. You don't have to know anything about our API. Plug this in, and you can start chatting with our selector copilot. Now, if you look at something like the other ones, I find the tendency is that they're landing on. So if you look at Slack, they're all Node.js solutions. So what you get is a TypeScript.index.ts file, and this is basically the schema and how they do it in TypeScript, which will compile to JavaScript, and it runs in Node. So if you really wanted to interrogate what the code looks like on how they're wrapping their APIs in MCP, it's all open source, and they give you everything here. So if you can read TypeScript, it's not that challenging, right? But you can figure out their APIs.
I was gonna say I don't read TypeScript.
Okay,
but I could probably have Copilot explain it to me.
Exactly. You're gonna take you Control A, Control C, Control V into a Copilot, and what does this function do or whatever, right?
Yeah, I can just ask Claude, hey, what does this interface thing do? And yeah, it's breaking it down for me.
Awesome. That is
I'm not
so
actually
cool.
going to try to read through the whole thing now, but yeah.
I know, but I'm just saying, and you've shown a really good demo here of Copilot. If you want to really interrogate the open source code you're grabbing, you just, it's all there. They give you all the files. So if you want to collapse that Slack folder, here's how I start them up. So there's a docker_startup.sh file. And if you have a .env file, if not, use default values, build the containers, and then run the containers. So in theory, if you go to the README and make a .env file with, it'll show you if you go down a little bit. Yeah. Right. So those are the keys that you need for this to work. And actually, I need to update this README. I'm using Gemini. This code uses Gemini right now.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to be able to run it simply because of the keys, unless you have a Gemini key or some of these keys.
Not at the moment, no.
Okay. Now, so the idea is we run the startup script, and in Docker you're going to see the 6 or 7 containers. Okay. If you want to go and open up Selector Plus, the folder, I can show you how I scale these things. So go to the Py file, And I'm building this container as a container, which is really neat. It leads to this inception idea that I've come to find out about as DOD or DID, Docker in Docker.
Okay.
It's crazy. So this container will come up, and then as it needs the tools, it will spin up micro containers inside the container to invoke the tool that it needs. So if you want to collapse, just go along the side panel. We can collapse these things as we go. If you go up a little bit. So collapse that one. So these first two functions, see the tools folder, if you expand that on the left, there's a folder tools. So these are tools I've written that take an IP address and do something with it. Ping it or curl it or trace route or whois or whatever. So it doesn't have to be MCP driven. Those are tools that I have locally. And what we're looking at is a Lang graph, right? So I want my graph, my assistant in my graph, to have a connection to tools. And those tools could be just a local script, or they could be offered by an MCP server on the other side of the world, right?
All right.
So if we go back to Selector Plus, and we'll just keep collapsing things here. So this discovery tool is a class that I've made as an MCP client. And what the tool does is it literally goes to the MCP server and asks it to list the tools that it has and the capabilities of those tools. And this is about 500 lines of code. I don't want that to intimidate anyone. But could you just do a file find in here and do a -MCP? Because I just want to show you how easy this scales and what the real idea here behind this. Collapse the startup script just in this file. Yeah, in the not the index files either. So can you just move the search into your main window instead of searching in files? Just do a Control F inside of there. Yeah, do that -MCP. Okay, so if you scroll down a bit, all the other code aside, if I wanted to add, let's say a Gmail one or a Postgres one or whatever, I update 2 lines of code. I add the path to the container, and if it's Python or Node, it depends. And if you do the find again, there's a second in reference to this. So we can stop sharing the screen and just talk about this a little bit now if you want, Ned.
Sure.
But that code is out there, and I'm working with Selector clients. We have some clients that are moving into MCP, and they wanted to trying a Selector MCP. But I'm completely obsessed with this. It is so cool. It's so neat to see the tools and to see them work. What I think is interesting is that, let's say I did find it, like I said, another MCP. I don't change anything. I put their MCP, I clone the repo, put it in my folder, add 2 lines of code to my code, and now suddenly I have a Postgres connection. Because I'm going to discover the Postgres tools and know what to send them and how to use them fully dynamically and automatically. So this might scale to be hundreds, thousands, millions of tools in the long term from large providers and people trying to make a lot of money off of this. The solutions we make in the future are likely going to be super hyper connected MCP calls all around the world, because and maybe there's a fee to use, I don't know, Air Canada's MCP, right? But I think of the competitive advantage. Just let's take airlines. Airline 1, I can go on their portal and say, I'd like to fly to Mexico Friday for less than $1,000. Airline 2, I'm clicking widgets and I'm clicking calendars and I'm setting thresholds and I'm searching and clicking and finding. And now, would that drive you to use Airline 1 as a user experience to just be able to talk to the thing? Or Airline 2 that maybe doesn't using MCP, right?
I think there's probably a middle ground there where I still want to be able to click and fill out specific fields when I'm, like for a flight, these are the dates I want to fly. I don't want to necessarily have to type that out. Let me pick it from a calendar widget.
Okay.
But other interactions where I'm describing more information that doesn't neatly fit into a drop-down box or into the UI, that's where I want to engage with an AI that can just interpret my natural language and apply additional filters or use that additional context.
Right. I can see that. I think that's a fair point. As a hybrid of the browser of the future is going to have natural language all over the place and still some point and click operations. I can see that.
Yeah, it makes me think that there are things that fit really nicely into a UI when there's just specific information that always needs to be supplied when you're trying to accomplish a goal. But then there's like context and additional things that don't fit nicely into a radio button. And wouldn't it be really nice to include some just free form fields where you can provide that information and see what it does with it?
Yeah. Or if it was smart enough as I'm typing, I'd like to fly to, and it auto completes or suggests the place, or, and when I get to the date portion, it gives me some calendars.
Oh, that would be
totally
neat.
interactive hybrid, I also think, everything that we see through text is easily transferred into text to speech, right? So we're not far away from just talking into our phone to accomplish goals, right? That is not hard to overcome.
I find that right now, when you're using an AI assistant through voice control, it still feels very awkward because you're not sure the phrasing that you need to use to get it to do the thing you want. Like, I know when I want my Google Home to do a very specific task, I figured out the exact phrasing I need. But like when it's a more general task, it never feels like a conversation. It always feels like it gets it wrong and then it shoots me over to search results.
Yeah, it's almost like an uncanny valley, but for speech. You know what I mean? Like when you watch certain AI, you go like right away, your mind goes, I'm looking at something that's artificial in a sense, right? There's still an uncanny valley there, even with text-driven things. I'm not saying this is perfect, but for certain like abstracted things, let me just show you the image that we have. We were talking about ChatGPT's 4.5's new capability of images, and here's the image I got back. So I took my selfie picture. Can I get an over-the-top anime of this selfie? And look at what we get back now. It doesn't have the white in the beard, but that is pretty good. That is pretty good.
It is pretty good.
And then the earlier one is the background that I have is me asking for an AI wizard in the style of Warhammer. Has either of you played with Sora yet at all?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Not, but I haven't really gotten.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little late, y'all. I dropped in the chat that I had some production stuff that I had to deal with, and that's the story of my life where last minute things will come up. But I have played a little bit with Sora. It is very, I'd say, freaky how videos can just like be constructed and it looks so real. Like the realism is, I'd say, a 9 out of 10. Like if you're not paying attention to the details, ooh, I see a little doggo there. I see a little dog. What kind of dog is that, by the way? Sorry,
this is my my golden retriever, Chloe. She's I'm telling you. So everything you've ever heard about a golden retriever like is 100% true. She's most aloof, happy, trotting around. She's just amazing. Just an amazing dog. But no, I agree with you about the video. The image, the new generation of image. It's as the hardware gets better, the software will get better. As the hardware gets better, and we're in this infinite cycle of things are just going to continue to get more and more human-like. But Marina, we did a real crash course on MCP. We didn't get to run anything, but that's okay. Just because we need a Gemini key or something, but.
In 30 seconds, can you TLDR or TLDW MCP? Because we're like where I work right now, we're starting to get deep into a lot of agent stuff, agentic stuff. And I would just love to be a little bit more acclimated in the world of AI agents and MCP and how that all works. And, you know, I've read that it's a standard, I've read that it's a protocol, I've read a lot of different things, but I cannot centralize myself around what it's supposed to be. I can't center myself, I mean to say.
Sure. So let me reset my canvas. I find it's easier to show than to tell. So I'll try to do both here. Hey, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So crash course in MCP. So I'm using Lang graph, let's say, right? So I have this graph where I have, and this will make sense in a second. I have a start and an end, and I have an assistant, and I have tools, okay? And we just start and exit. But with the tools, we can iterate. And this just keeps going until we get a satisfactory answer. Now here's where MCP comes in. These tools can now connect to an MCP server. All right, so let's just pretend this is for GitHub, right? And I want to make a file on GitHub. One of the tools that MCP has is a create file tool. Okay, follow so far? Yeah, okay. So then my question comes in, my prompt, can you please check the health of the network and make a report and put it up on my GitHub as a markdown file? The assistant goes, I can't do that. ChatGPT or Gemini can't do that on its own. But wait, I have access to tools, and one of those tools that I've discovered, I didn't hard code anything. I snapped in this Docker container, and my MCP client, which is here, MCP client, can start to discover tools from everybody's MCPs. And this starts to get crazy and hyper connected, because back here with this prompt, I can start to do things like, here's one I've done. Could you please check selector for device health for S4, the health of S4? And some interfaces are failing, and that's what it tells me. Could you take that and send me a summary to a Slack channel? Could you make a local markdown file of the report? Could you send it to GitHub? Pretend that the server is in Atlanta and get me the geolocation of the server, and a couple of other things. I'm not writing any of those tools. I'm not. They're all just snapped in like Lego blocks, and my toolkit just keeps growing and growing and growing with what I would call, I hate to use the term foreign tools, let's call them remote tools. Because these MCP servers, you and me could have MCP servers as offerings that are all over the world. Say someone in Belgium makes the best calculator MCP function. If you have calculations you want done, you're going to import the Belgian calculator tool, and your code just says go and discover the tools from their MCP and start integrating them. Now, in terms of us as developers, if I have a REST API, Selector has a REST API in how many, Ned? It was less than 100 lines of code, right?
Yeah.
100 lines of Python, you can write an MCP server that abstracts away all the complexity of having to know the body of the post and start a thread and do this and do that. Here's the tool I want my customers to be able to use. Right? We were talking about an airline booking tool, right? So airline A might have a booking tool, a cancellation tool, different tools from different MCP providers, right? And you just front end, when you ask it, I'd like to book a flight to whatever for this date in this city for this price, it calls the different MCP tools that make up the solution, and it's all natural language, right?
So it almost feels to me that MCP is like an extension and a common protocol that allows all of these individualized components to talk to each other. It's an interface, effectively.
It is.
Okay.
So think about
Okay.
OSPF, the routing
Yes.
protocol, or
Yes.
if we go back to RIP, so OSPF is a really good one. Let's say that it's 1990 and I'm a hardware vendor. I'm Cisco and I want to sell switches and routers, but I'm also Juniper and Arista and Northern Telecom and all the different providers at the time making silicon. Well, they could each make their own protocol, like Cisco tried to do with EIGRP, or we could all come together and work on a common standard and protocol that we can all make money from. We can all get our devices to talk together, right? I think it's very similar. If I'm made an AI agent, I don't want to have to, here's how you use it, and here's the specification and all this noise, right? You just say, I'm offering tools through this new protocol. And it's similar to DHCP in a way that instead of a pool of IP addresses, an MCP server has a pool of tools, right? Do you want to call up that Model Context Protocol IO again, Ned, and we can show Marino how to go shopping for these things?
Yeah.
So Marino, go to modelcontextprotocol.io, and you're going to see a section called Example Servers. And it will lead you to this source code. Yeah, I think you had it on the other tab here. Okay, yeah, so here we go. So these are, and there are quite literally dozens, if approaching hundreds of these things out there, right? So if we take the file system one, it's neat because my solution, so in your tool, yes, bumps in the wire, you have to just, so in my code, it's 2 lines of code. The container name, where to find the tools, and then how to start the container, something like that. It really is just 2 lines of code that my MCP client needs to identify where to find the MCP server. But the file server one, if you click on that, look at all the things it can do. And think of the complexity if you were going to write this in Python or C or Java or whatever. Writing files, reading files, this is not trivial stuff, right? And all this takes is a path. You say, you know what? I've mounted this volume, store your files or read the files from here. And in your prompt, you say, how's the weather in Dallas? And could you make a text file of the report? Enter, and it makes the file, right? Takes you 5 minutes to add it. Next thing you want to add is Google Maps. You literally go down, scroll down here a little bit on the left and find the Google Maps folder and read their README file and see what tools they have, right? Suddenly your solution has access to these hundreds, if not dozens, if not millions of tiny little tools, tiny little functions that people make available.
You could do this before, but you would be required to read the API documentation for each of these things. Read through the API documentation, then integrate that API into the calls that you're making inside your application, which might be really good if you want something that is very well-defined and, what's the word I'm looking for? Precise. I want my application to interact with this API in a very specific way based off these methods. But for what you're talking about, which is more of a conversational, less deterministic interaction, then these tools, this MCP format makes a lot more sense. So I guess it depends on, is this something that people are going to be interacting with, or is this something where you just need an application to accomplish a task?
Right, but there's a lot less fragility here, a lot less static nature in here. Like we could make the internet work with static routes, right? Like there's no reason why you couldn't just go on the router by router and statically assign all the routes. But we came up with this protocol so the routers can talk to routers and just advertise, I know how to get here. So, right, and when I connect to an MCP server, when I throw up a Hail Mary question as a prompt, it goes, oh yeah, I know how to do that. Like I have a tool that says, add something to Google Calendar. I can do that for you. Here's my specification. Here's how I need you to send me the data. Like SOAP tried to do this with XML, right?
Yeah.
Like they tried to do this with XML and SOAP, but no one wanted to deal with XML, right? It's like
Never do.
IPv6. No one wants to deal with hex. The things that hold people back, right? IPv6 is still at 50% adoption rate. It's not going any. It's not like it's still making noise. And SOAP died as soon as REST came out because you could use JSON payloads instead of XML. I would argue now we've just gone a step further, and now we're dealing with natural language instead of JSON payloads, right?
So I remember when REST was really on the rise, and there were a lot of XML fans who were kind of upset about the lack of structure that is included in JSON.
I can't put comments in JSON. Right.
Well, and not just that, but like XML has an XML definition that defines the acceptable fields and the structure of the XML you're getting. And JSON doesn't do that. JSON's like, here's all this stuff. Good luck.
Right. Well, it's funny. In REST, there's no P. That's what I used to teach my students. There's no protocol here. It's like the Wild West. Whatever you want to define your specification, go for it. It's not a protocol. It's not SOAP. But if you're going to deal with SOAP, there are standards and schemas that you must follow, right? Even something like UML. This is like UML except for AI models and AI tools, right?
I think the thing that I keep getting stuck on is that it feels very loosey-goosey. You know what I mean?
Sure it is. It's vibe coding, man. We just, ask the AI to do the thing, right?
And like, you have to trust that the AI is going to do what you expect and that you have a way to verify. Like if I tell it I want it to write a file to a particular location, I need to be able to verify it wrote the files and that the content of the file is actually what I want. And it didn't like hallucinate and just fill it with strawberries.
I know, but at the opposite end of the spectrum, and I'm not trying to let anyone off the hook here, I don't think we can expect infallibility out of any tool, out of anything.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So that there's some emotion attached to AI, right? Adoption is slow in certain technological pockets. I mean, I just joined, I'm not even gonna name them, but I joined another famous webcast Slack, and they made an AI room, and the first comment was, basically good, keep that AI talk in its own little space because I don't want to see it in the general chat, right? There's just a general hostility against this thing. And so, there's a bit of an emotional attachment to our work and to doing things the hard way. I'm going to say the hard way because this really is a much easier way, right? I don't know. I from what I've seen, from just playing with this for a couple of weeks now, I think this is going to lead to like a new internet of agents, like another layer of World Wide Web, but agentic, tools all over the place,
Because I work in infrastructure so much, I'm immediately thinking about the way that this tools concept could apply to asking for Azure to create some infrastructure for me. And does Azure have an MCP server? Because I feel like it's going to, very shortly.
Yeah. Do you use Terraform to do any of that stuff automatically now?
I do. Terraform is my go-to.
Terraform has a Terraform registry MCP server, Terraform model context protocol tool, connect AI models to your Terraform registry via the MCP. Terraform is all over this. Yeah. Now, in terms of Azure, if I just do Azure MCP, create an Azure MCP server with Azure AI agent service. So here we go, MCP from March 16th. So just from this week? There's a whole article here on Microsoft Community Hub. Hey, actually, do you want to call up this article? You should. Everyone should see this, I think, and it might help everybody on this call, even me. So if you Google Tech Community Microsoft or something, I Googled Azure MCP.
If you want to go to the private chat, I can share.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Sorry, let me do that. That's probably easier than you fuddling around. Here we go. All right, yeah. So go there, and let's just take a look at this together. It might maybe visual. It has visuals and animations and stuff. This might help the audience and a good way maybe to wrap things up.
Okay, let me get that loaded.
So this is for Azure, integrating Azure OpenAI for enhanced tool integration and prompting. And they talk about the USB thing, and they have a whole video here. But standardization, communication methods, tool integration. How does it work? We have hosts, clients, servers, data sources. And if you keep going down, they have a little animation here. Yeah, so what is it?
This is a great animation.
Yeah, so this is sort of what I was trying to draw. We've got our application. In my case, it's an assistant in LangGraph, which has access to tools. And when you ask it questions, it can go to the web, to databases, to GitHub, to Slack, to Gmail, to local file systems. Sort of what I was trying to get across.
Yeah.
And then they get into how it's all implemented and how you do it, right? So this is pretty straightforward stuff, right? You're going to make an MCP connection and go find its tools. See, get tools. That's it, line 16.
Yep.
Right? So go get the tools from that MCP server, and then you have access to the tools for the rest of your Python script. So to answer in a long way, to get back to your original question, I would suggest, yes, you could use a natural language interface to say, could you please create me a load balancer in Azure or whatever, right?
Yeah. You mentioned the Terraform model context protocol or MCP tool, and this one specifically can read a Terraform config, analyze plans, apply configurations, and manage state. So it's sort of like I'm sure it uses the Terraform CLI, but it helps with constructing the various commands. And I mean, Terraform's not that complicated when it comes to commands.
No, but if it's abstracted even further to just natural language, right?
It's super interesting. What's this MCP.so? I guess
it's someone actually, I think Alex asked earlier if there's like a GitHub for MCPs. I think you've stumbled.
MCP.so.
I think you've stumbled across it. Yeah.
I think I might have.
Right. So then you just, Ansible. Is there one for Ansible? I'm going to Google that. I think Red Hat maybe made an announcement about. Maybe I'm wrong, but
someone did make one. Ansible Tower MCP server. It's not a Red Hat official thing.
Ansible Automation Platform MCP server for AI agents on playbooks.com.
Oh, look good. Hey, Cat.
Welcome to the party, Cat.
Yeah, it looks like there's some Ansible ones out there. Hey, kitty. Oh, I thought it was a real cat. It's a cat person. I thought there was like a cat in someone's background or something. I'm sorry, cat. I didn't mean to call you that. I thought there was a real cat. I was looking on Google, not hey. So Ansible Tower. So now think, right, pull back. Go back to that animation if it's still up there. Right? So on top of what you see here, a Terraform MCP, an Ansible MCP, an Azure MCP. You just snap them in like Lego, right?
I've wanted to know more about MCP, and John, you have like expanded my brain. Like I was going to work on this other project, but now maybe this needs to be like my priority is like figuring out how to use this. And I'm really glad to see that you've done a lot of the work in Python that I can now copy.
You can take it. And actually, if you don't mind, let me make sure I find one that worked here. The other thing I want to maybe turn you on to is, I don't have a good example here. Never mind. A tool called Langsmith, which lets you have tracing of these tool calls and gives you a visual dashboard. It's free right now. It's in beta. You get an API key. You literally decorate your Python functions with @traceable. And then in your Langsmith, you can see the waterfall. My assistant called this tool. This tool sent this input. It got that output. It moved on to the next tool. It's called Lang Smith. It's very powerful.
That sounds a little like open telemetry in some
This
ways.
thing?
Yeah. So if you go to Lang Smith, I can try to show you one. I don't know that I have a working. Let me see if I can find a working example.
Okay. So while John's doing that, Marino, we've got our own like AI project that we've been working on. Do you see an opportunity to leverage MCP in what we've been working on?
I think we have to evaluate where we can pivot and start on the quest of MCPing our little agentic app here. I love Kat's comment here. MCP plus Hotel is going to be the next AI ops hotness. Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. And if you're not blown away enough, let me just show you what I mean by Lang Smith.
Okay.
Okay, so this is my dashboard, and you can see that this particular call cost me about $11. Okay, and how many tokens I used. But if I go into the waterfall, look. So I asked the question here, what can you tell me about this packet capture, step-by-step reasoning, if you find public IPs, do a comprehensive lookup, blah, 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 right? So it looks up the PCAP RAG tool. It finds a public IP, so it does all these subtools, dig and curl and ping and traceroute and stuff. It gets the creates the GitHub report on GitHub, sends me an email, gets the elevation of the city that the device is in, and then posts a big summary into Slack. All completely visualized, and I can trace down any problems in any of those tools or calls. So when you're wondering, what is my agent doing, or like, is it working? The Smith capability gives you that visualization to troubleshoot. Or if I swap out LLMs and I want to compare performance rates or costs or whatever, it gives you all that visibility.
Wow, this is just so much to chew on. My brain is
I didn't mean to leave you with this heavy stuff over the weekend, guys. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's what weekends are for. Weekends are for fun projects.
Hey, Sebastian. Yeah, so I mean, I tell you what, I'll give you guys 6 weeks and I'll come back and we can say, was it a bust? Was this your real thing? Did you guys start adopting it? Have you played with it? I'll give you a couple weeks and I can come back.
I've already got an idea for something I could use, because it's a real challenge to get to write new blog posts when something comes out. And I could see using this to, when this new post happens, when this thing happens, write a post, put it on GitHub, create a PR, send it to me so I can approve it. And then if I like what you wrote, I'll post it. If not, I'll revise it.
Yeah. There's one MCP tool that you can pass it a URL and it'll scrape everything and give you a summary of the URL you've given it. So you could maybe add that to your tool, in that all you need to do is say, here's the URL. Could you write me up a quick blog post, post it to my GitHub? And away you go, right?
That is so cool. All right, I think we are at time.
Ned, I see. Did something click there or what?
Oh, yeah. All right, 6 weeks.
All right, 6 weeks. I'll be back. Okay. All right, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for... I got to go watch the first half of this and see what went on. And it's going to be great because I'm going to be on a plane. I can download this video and watch it while I'm on the plane.
There you go. There you go. I was literally walking up to random people in the last airport I was in saying, have you heard about MCP yet? It's going to change everything.
All right. Well, John,
guys. You guys take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye, everyone.
Next week. Oh, he just left. All right. Next week, we'll be back at it, I think, right? Or maybe we need a break. I don't know. We'll
next week, we're back at it. There's no stopping this train.
All right. Well, everyone, have a great Friday. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.